about planting green and take questions and all that jazz.
All right, Jeremy, Luckey farming just a little bit south of Judah, right outside of Judah. Got a dairy farm down there and raising, I guess, everything for the cows on the farm, or all the feed just off the farm. So everything goes to feed. We don't have anything that gets sold as cash crop. So as far as planting green, so to speak, is concerned, I guess that's usually ahead of a corn crop is what we're using the corn for, like corn silage. And so we're always planting into whatever's growing from last year's cover crop, I guess, into the corn into that. So we've been doing that for 6 years now, and probably like most other people planting greens have just as many failures as successes. We're getting into now learning that with the rye is a very popular thing to plant, and that I guess just because it stays green all winter, and so we're using that to kind of keep the ground alive during the winter. But I've been using less and less of that in the mixes, and kind of getting the mixes down to where, I mean, at one point we had used 150 pounds of rye an acre, which just creates a mat, which was really nice to see. But then the next year it sucked up so much nitrogen, the corn, it was really hard to keep ahead of the nitrogen needs for the corn. And so now we're kind of down to, we're planting about 40 pounds of rye amongst a mix of everything else, and that seems to be keeping the ground a lot mellower for longer. I think it opens up our window for planting a little bit longer because we don't have as much of the rye just soaking up the nitrogen and growing too fast. And it seems to be a lot better for planting into. And we got a lot of rock, so we're not tilling any of it because we want to have enough dirt to till. And the thing we're going to try this year as far as planting green is this spring. I think we're going to go ahead, and as soon as things start to green up, we're probably going to spray off that rye, but then leave all the broadleaf species. And then with the idea being that then I can still continue to get some additional nitrogen credits from the broadleaves until those are terminated. So we'll still probably plant green, but technically not into, the rye won't be part of the mix anymore. So we'll kind of plant when it's ready and then kill off the other stuff later, because in a corn crop then the broadleaves will be really easy to kill, I guess, depending on how long we let those grow. Just depending on conditions, moisture, and all that. Here, Mike, you can talk. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
All right, I'm Mike Wenger, farm south of Broadhead, about 1,500 acres. We do cash crops, some corn, some beans, wheat. Milk quite a few cows, love our manure. It's a big benefit. Jeremy's done it for 6 years, so he's way more experienced than me. I had a few acres in 23, planted more in 24. And it's a scary thing to do, to go out into a field that's all green and be planting corn or beans. But read enough about it, wanted to try it. First year, just planted into some rye. Planted on, the first field was good, rich bottom ground. And of course, that was a big, heavy crop of rye. And I tell you what a mess that was with the planter. Wrapped everything, plugged everything. Went home, cleaned it out, determined, went back, and that was about 30 acres there. Thought I better set my planter pretty deep because I want to get them seeds in the ground. Well, come time for wanting to row your corn, and you'd have to walk out there to find them in about a half a stand. And you wonder, where are them other plants? You dig down, well, they're not even germinated yet. So cold down there from all the cover crop. So that year, that field, it was about a half a stand. It was going to be silage corn. Huge ears. One thing about a thin crop of corn, you get huge ears. So the silage tested pretty good because it was high in starch, but of course the yield was down. The second field that year, I planted on hilly ground, some stony, and some bottom ground in that field, and experienced the same thing with plugging up the planter. So I told my brother, you got to spray it off. So we hit it with Roundup and waited maybe 3-4 days. Definitely wasn't dry, but it had started to wilt, and so we got her planted. But again, you just wonder how am I going to get any yield out of this crop? And going through the field that fall, the monitor's hitting 300 bushel, and it just blows your mind away. How could you raise corn in that weather? So we were a little more encouraged the next year, last spring. Again, the rye was probably planted heavier than it should be planting green into, but it is what it is. You head out there and made sure I didn't plant it so deep. And one of the biggest issues is our planter, 12-row planter has one drive wheel, and I get so much slippage with that greasy rye. Well, you don't want to plant at 20,000 where your monitor's saying you're at, so you bump your population up. So I was set about 39,000, aiming for 29 to 30,000. Well, you go up over the knolls where it's thin, and boy, she'll drive them. Now I got 39,000 plants over the knobs, and then you go down in the bottom where the ground is rich, and of course there the rye is lush. And now the drive wheel's slipping, and so I'm down around 20,000. So I thought, well, I'm going to really prove things to myself that this don't work. And that was well, Jake tested it when we first started renting it, been just rented for years, never seen a fertilizer buggy. And Jake tested it and said that's the lowest field he's ever tested. Well, we do have lots of cow manure, so it got lots of cow manure for the last 3-4 years. And this fall went through, and instead of being a disaster, it was our best field, 234 bushel the acre. Just amazing how it can grow in that environment, but it does. The biggest problem, I don't have all the steer, and you can't see your mark. And I tell you, that makes you mad. And you vow never to do this again, but then you harvest 234 bushel, and yeah, we'll do it again. So I'm hoping to get all the steer on the planter tractor. I should tell you a little bit about our planter. We got Getter trash whips on the front. Then we got Martin closers. It's a disc. You take off the regular closing wheels, and it's a notch disc. And then following that, it reminds me of an International Planter rubber press wheel. That's what it reminds me of.
The big wide one?
The big wide one.
Yeah.
So I can close it, dry, wet, hard, soft, I can close it. No problem there. Whatever that environment is. So I can plant it, I can get it closed. You plant a crop, boy, you're harvesting sunlight. Well, this rye is this tall, and there's no sunlight for them seedlings. I planted the first field we planted in 24. It was alfalfa. Good standing places, poor in others. That was the first field I planted. The alfalfa was probably 6 inches tall. And the landlord said, "You think it'll grow?" I didn't know what to say. I just said, "I hope so." My Pioneer lives by there, and he said, "I went by that every day, and I wonder what them guys are doing." And we wondered too. I'd go down there, sure enough, them plants were coming. But of course, the next day after I planted, we killed it off. So, but alfalfa, that takes a while for that to die, but finally you could see the rows coming above the corn. Probably 3 weeks later than it would have if it had been bare ground. There again, no sun. So I suppose I planted in April, and it was probably late May when finally corn came above the alfalfa. Middle of June, I went down there, and now that cornfield is just beautiful. And that alfalfa had rotted down, and it was probably a thick mat about 2 inches thick covering that soil. And we had them heavy rains, no erosion, of course, it just protected that soil. And that mat stayed there. When I was down there checking, we were gonna chop it for corn silage, I was checking for the maturity of the tray to chop for corn silage. And that's the first I could see any soil underneath that mat. That's how long that mat held. And of course, when we got into the dry weather, you drive by these dry spots in the fall, when it gets dry and you see them pale spots on the rocky knolls, I didn't see none of that. That mat held that moisture in there. And that was a beautiful crop of corn. We chopped it so I don't have any yield records for it, but you know, you count your ears and you count your kernels and you count your plants, and it was big 200s per yield in that field.
What's your chemical program look like for those crops when you burn them down?
Well, Brianna there, she's our agronomist, and she tells me what to spray.
Oh,
I'm not your agronomist.
Well, your boss is anyway. We use Roundup and then whatever.
Like a 2-pass system?
Yeah, we're 2-pass.
Yep. So one right before canopy then?
Yes,
Right, yep.
mostly Roundup the second pass.
Right. But then no residuals, right? Because that's what I've seen when you got so much trash on the ground, the residuals don't seem to be hitting the ground and doing what they're supposed to.
Well, probably, yeah.
So I know we went away from residuals altogether, and a lot of times you just 1 pass, where you just get the burn down, and as long as you got the cover and the corn gets up and canopied, a lot of times we can get away with just the 1 pass because you got enough residual or enough residue there. And so we've been getting away with a pretty cheap spray program, of, more or less like a 2,4-D Roundup.
We did have one field of rye that we no-tilled soybeans into. They were food grade beans. After we planted the beans, we sprayed that with Roundup just to kill the rye. And that went down, and we never sprayed another bit on that. And that field was a clean field of beans. That cover crop went down and shielded the soil, and we had no weeds there. One thing I will mention on that field that we planted that silage corn on, that was alfalfa, so that hadn't been worked, and the alfalfa had been no-tilled into wheat, which had been no-tilled, so that's been no-till for 6-7 years. And we had a heavy rain right before we went into chop, and those trucks left no marks on that field. That moisture had drained through.
What do you guys do for variety selection? Do you change it up now that you're planting green? Do you select some kind of different variety or the same variety?
We haven't, no different.
Same thing.
No.
I tell them, give me the toughest corn you got. That's usually what I tell them. So yeah, the corn's the same. The only thing we've been switching up is just just more of a variety in the cover crops has been the big, that I think is making the biggest difference, because for a while the ground was getting really hard, because rye makes ground hard, everybody knows that. And so by having way less rye in there, because otherwise, that's what we noticed, you got like a 4-hour window to plant, sometime in the spring, in like a pure rye field, your ground's only going to be fit to plant for like a very short amount of time, because it only mellowed out for a little bit. And I know, my planter's just, I don't have anything, it's just a straight row opener with rubber wheels behind it. And so then I just wait, because I have a limited number of acres, so I always just wait until it's perfect conditions, and then I can go out and plant all my acres in 18 hours. So I only need a 2-day window, but if you got more acres to cover, then you need more stuff. Or if you make the ground a little mellower, that's what we're finding with the mix, is by having 4, 5, 6 different things out there, and not as reliant on the rye for your cover, that we're actually, the ground's mellower for longer, and then it kind of opens up your seeding or your planting window, really helps out that way. But that's what, so Mike, we both played with roller. We had that roller for a while.
Yeah, mixed reviews on that. It just didn't work quite like we wanted.
It's sold now, so that's
We even went out with the cultimulcher in one field, and I think that did as good a job as that crimping roller.
Yeah. The crimping roller was really expensive. We bought one from, I don't know, out east somewhere. And then, I mean, it laid it down, but like you said, if you didn't hit it right, then it came back up. Then I tried putting it on the corn planter or I tried putting one that went right on the corn planter, and it did a nice job then too, but if the rye was too short, it bounced back up. And so it seemed more like the problem was the rye, not the roller. And then so now I just took everything back off the planter and just went back to planting corn when it's planting corn time, instead of playing with that. The roller just, I don't know, it just didn't really seem to fit the environment around here. Maybe in beans might have a little bit better fit. You can wait longer.
Maybe you could, but we didn't have, we got a no-till John Deere drill, so that's got a wide gauge wheel, so a lot of it gets knocked down with the drill. But that beans or that rye all laid down, the rain took it down and laid flat.
Like, you guys been playing with some interseeding too, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, and that's really been a disappointment, you know. We flew it out in the fall, you know, different times. That's kind of a disappointment, hit and miss. One thing we noticed were we had it spread on with a high interseed or side dress time. We mixed the seed with the urea. Well, where the fertilizer driver missed and took down a row, so you had 30 inches. Well, there we had an ice stand in there, but 30-inch rows, you just
60.
yeah. If you
Yeah.
rode one down, so you
Yeah.
had 60 inches. Yeah, you got a good stand, but
No corn.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then we built that interseeder, and we got some growth, but we're not impressed with it. And then, of course, you've got to watch what chemicals you're using because you're trying to do this interseeding. So the last year, the fall of 23, we had interseeded this one field, except around the outside. Well, then, as soon as we took the corn silage off, we went and we seeded that outside with rye and the no-till drill just after chopping the corn silage. And we had more growth there than we had on that interseeding. So in 24, they didn't do none of it.
Yeah. Yeah, interseeding's been pretty disappointing and all. Just doesn't seem like there's enough light there, which obviously that's why you're planting the corn, is to shade the weeds out.
Yeah.
So whatever you plant's a weed. We had good luck. Well, we seem to have it seems like the chemical's been holding us back too. We had good luck with what I think, because we're going to try it again next year, interseeding. We went and instead of doing 60-inch rows, we went to 2 rows on, 1 row off, 2 rows on. So you kind of have, strips of 2 rows going down the field. So then every other row would be a 60-inch, 30-inch, 60-inch, 30-inch. But then I bumped the population up to like 45,000. So then my whole per acre I was down to 30,000 like I wanted to be. And I maintained the yield in that. So as long as I still had the population, so I still maintained the yield was the same in that chunk of the field as was the rest of the field. But then, and I had more light in there. The interseeding did better in that than the rest of the field, but it still wasn't enough. Like you said, I still went and planted everything after. And with silage, it's hard with interseeding because the stuff that you put out there, it has to withstand the wheel traffic of the silage trucks. So a lot of the turnips and stuff, if you're going to plant turnips, seem to be the thing that grow the easiest. The turnips just get destroyed with the silage trucks. So a lot of the stuff you plant with interseeding, we've only had luck with ryegrass and clover holding up to the wheel traffic and not enough to not replant it. So yeah, interseeding's been really disappointing. That's the best way of putting that.
Yeah.
So for that 5-way mix that you're planting, how early in the fall do you have to plant to get that to grow, and what chemical do you use to take out the grass without taking out the
A lot of times, so unfortunately we've been in the corn silage field. Has kind of been continuous corn for a couple of years now, and so it's always after corn silage, I guess, has been when the mix has been going in. And so the thing that works the best is if you can be the first guy chopping in the fall, then your cover crop will do the best. Because it seems like if you can get chopped by the 1st of September, then you'll actually get a cover crop worth having. Otherwise, I shouldn't say that, but otherwise there seems to be a rain in there that really seems to make or break the cover crops after corn silage. You can either look like it just came after wheat if you're planted by the 1st of September, and if you get into that second week of September, then a lot of time, your rye only gets that tall, and there's just one rain in there that really makes a difference. And so then all we're coming back in, and so like say this fall, I planted rye and oats and sorghum would have been like my 3 grasses that I had in there. Well, the oats and the sorghum winter kill, and so then the rye's left. And then the rye come the spring, so then I've got turnips, clover, and hairy vetch would be what's or the turnips may or may not survive. But the hairy vetch and the clover is kind of what's surviving out of the broadleaves. So then I'll just come in with like a clepidin and kill that, or like a Select Max, or they're all clepidin. I think is the chemical, right, Jake? So you come in with just a grass killer, and then just that's the plan, I guess. I mean, I may have the same unsuccessful story on this whole idea next year that I do right now, but that was the idea. Is then because I'm the idea being it thins out the stand a little bit too for that light issue, and then I think we still got the roots. So you still got the benefits of the live roots in the ground, of keeping the microbial population alive, and then a lot of those varieties that will be left won't be as tall of varieties, so then you won't have as much shade, and hopefully still kind of keep the ground cover, and then start to get the breakdown of that rye, because that's the idea, to get those nutrients released out of that rye, I guess earlier, because that's really what it seems to be like. Is if we get that rye too tall, then so much is tied up into the rye, we can't get it back out for our corn crop. And we dropped down Mike that too, where we've done that too, where you let the rye get super tall, plant your corn into, and if it's not breaking down fast enough, you got all your juice in the rye, well then you're just adding fertilizer like crazy trying to keep your corn crop alive, and that's kind of, not the idea of what we're planting the cover crop for. So, because that's what we've had, a tall rye crop. It was a year where there was no rain, and we were able to maintain the corn yield, but we put on enough nitrogen to grow 300 bushel corn, and only got 170, 180 bushel corn out of the deal. But it was just trying to break that rye down and keep that corn growing. And so we were doing tissue tests and soil tests, and just kept calling for more nitrogen, because that rye soaked up all the nitrogen before you planted the corn, and then the brown biomass trying to break down, the biomass was soaking up all the nitrogen in season. So it was like, we had manure and urea and sprayed on 20. It was every single kind of nitrogen you could put on there just to try to utilize to bring that rye down. So it was an expensive corn crop.
Well, supposedly there's that chemical in rye that's an inhibitor for the corn. What are they?
Yeah, leopathy.
Something like that. I really believe it's more a nitrogen issue.
I don't believe in that leopathy idea either.
Right. I think the nitrogen's tied up, and that's why your corn crop is struggling.
Yeah, Bob.
Jeremy, do you plant green into alfalfa, or do you not have any alfalfa?
I have the best luck we had into an alfalfa, and we were running into this with another guy who had a really good stand of clover, and so then so the recommendation that I had that we'd seen work in the past is when we had a straight alfalfa field, then after like third crop, I went in and actually seeded rye into there pretty heavy. And then, took the rest of the crops off for the year. Then the next spring, and that was probably the best planting green experience we've had. And the alfalfa and the rye were all about knee high or something. And it was really soft, and you could fly through there with the planter. Everything was just working. I think what we were getting that nitrogen to carbon ratio about to where it needed to be. Because otherwise the alfalfa, when it would have still been alive, you could probably plant into that in the ground super hard. And you got to have a lot of down pressure, whereas that rye seemed to negate that. All the nitrogen from the alfalfa protein really seemed to kind of help get you back in balance there. So yeah, as far as, if you're planting into a straight alfalfa crop, I don't know, I guess I know we had some acres that we're going to plant next year that was straight alfalfa that we didn't have the chance to plant rye into early, and we actually just burnt off all the alfalfa last fall, just knowing the idea that it's just going to be hard as a rock trying to plant, or burn it off right away this spring. But otherwise, that alfalfa is just going to turn that ground into a rock, and then you have to have a lot more stuff on your planter to get the corn into the ground.
Well, I've had that trouble, that's why I asked.
Yeah, I would say it's just from the pure alfalfa, is what I've seen.
I think it's moisture. The alfalfa's pulling over moisture.
A little bit. I guess I tend to look at it more from like the carbon to nitrogen ratio idea. Whereas I think that alfalfa is just burning up all the carbon in the ground and making that hard, kind of collapsing the soil. I mean, the soil structure in an alfalfa field is pretty terrible. So, you know, you're trying to plant into compacted soil. I mean, it's got taproot, but I mean, you dig up a chunk of alfalfa ground, it's just a brick. So, yeah, we've really had luck where when you can plant good, when you can take your hand and just dig it into the dirt and it's nice and loose, you know, with a whole bunch of roots and everything in there and like really aggregated, then you can plant it. I mean, it's no different than a worked up field. You know, you're not going to plant into a field until it's nice and loose. So that's if it's all compacted from the previous crop, then if you're having problems with your planter, I guess you either got to add something to your planter to get the corn in the ground. I mean, corn planting is still pretty simple. You got to get it in the ground and cover it up, otherwise you're not going to get a corn crop. But yeah, I guess that's how I look at the alfalfa idea. Just straight alfalfa.
You got time for probably one more question.
I heard one producer, Stoughton area, who would plant non-GMO corn because he had such good weed control with his covered property system. Didn't have any need for post-emergence. Increased the ROI, obviously.
Right.
Consideration for, I know that you said that you haven't changed your hybrids, at least like you mentioned that before, but thoughts on that?
We have considered that. Definitely something to look into. We save that pass of chemicals and cost the seed.
It's kind of a goal. That's my goal, is we're going to try to get to the cheaper seed. And we're hoping, and that was kind of along the lines of hoping to keep, if we can keep that corn plant healthier, and I guess we're not getting away from fertilizer more as a different time and different type of application. And I was hoping if we could go with like a cheaper seed, say like that non-GMO seed, or go with a say non-treated seed, but then I'd still think we'd need to have some amendments to keep that seed in the soil healthy. And then also as that plant comes out, I think that would kind of equate to like a strong folio program after it, because I still don't think that you'd be getting everything that you needed from the dirt. So that's I guess was what we were going to play with a little bit this year. Is we're probably going to be doing a pretty robust foliar program, probably like a weekly spraying folio program on the corn ground to try to, hopefully get the yields and the plant health up a little bit, and then maybe take care of the seed, afterwards. But as for right now, we're sticking with the seed that we know that works the best, and then if there's improvements to be made after that, I think then we'll probably start to kick some stuff off the backside once we prove to ourselves that we can make it work with, the less input, or the different inputs, I guess.
All right, let's thank these guys for
We got shorted on the road. And the strips, the alfalfa's up in the hill.
Yeah.
The rest of it, 50 bushels. Put it in the hill. Turned us up in the hill.
Even with it growing,
Staying off the stuff.
so it didn't soak up all the moisture like it was supposed to.
It must have been, there's nitrogen in there. But the corn in there, they beat the rest, the average. If I had my load weighing right and something.
Well, it wasn't any less. Diesel wasn't.
223.
And that was mellow to plant into, wasn't it? Yeah.
Alright, so, last year this group toured Kaderly, 5,000 pound dairy, located just west of here. And they had a big pile of separated dairy solids. And I thought to myself, what are they doing with those separated dairy solids? I thought, well, there's a big pile of fertilizer. So this group's been talking about composting for quite a bit. So I thought, well, I'll be the guinea pig. And I'll take a bunch of dairy solids and we'll compost them and see how this works. So on the top there, I got 2 farms. My farm's on Hauser Lane. It's 10 miles from Pinnacle. And my sister's farm that I rent is on County S there. That's 6 miles from Pinnacle. We brought 1,900 and approximately 42 ton into the Hauser. That's 72 semi-loads. And we brought 55 loads into my sister's farm and composted them out through the summer, and cost about $4 a ton to have it trucked as raw material to 10 miles, and $380 there for to have it trucked to County S. So then I got Larson Acres to come over with their turner and turn them, and we did 6 turns at my farm and 5 at County S, because the stuff at Hauser came in June and the other stuff came in July, and then we hauled with 1 truck. It cost about $3 a ton to turn it, and then to spread. We also, I should say, the hauling was $150 an hour, and so was the spreading. So we had a 55% reduction in volume at my farm, and a 50% reduction at my sister's farm, and that's the cost per ton finish there, to $268, $278. And so when I got all done, it cost $13.90 a ton. I spent about $22,000 to bring that all in and compost it out and spread it. So we started with manure analysis, and I can point with this thing. I'll just point with my finger. So we got about 2.6 pounds of nitrogen there, the second, this one here, and then about 3 pounds of P2O5 and 4.4 pounds of K2O per ton in the separated solids. And the reason you compost is to convert some of that around. So that's the first turning. You're going to spend a bunch of time with the skid steer pushing that stuff up so that the skid steer goes through. And as you can see by the picture, I should have had the door on the skid steer. I was kind of hiding over there behind the glass. I was getting blasted a little bit with some manure. So, and the reason you compost manure is to convert it over. There's a lot of things listed here, but the biggest thing is probably to help with the biology because of the manure. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about Mike Witt's been spreading these solids just straight as solids, putting 20-25 ton per acre on. In the spring, he said he had a lot of problems. He made a big mat. He said the ground wouldn't dry out. He said they waited 2 weeks or better to try to get the ground to dry out. He said it just wouldn't dry out with that. And he said also that the separated solids has a lot of fiber in it, and it ties up a lot of nitrogen. And through the composting process, you're converting that fiber into usable nitrogen. So we're going to find out how good this helps the crop. Jeremy's messed, and Jerry Daniels have messed with some compost teas, and I'm like, I don't want to go through all that, but I can just put the compost on and I'll have the microbiology right there. So when we had big piles, all of a sudden the San Diego crane showed up and had to check it out. to do this, each farm had about 1.25 acres that the piles covered. Tanya and I came out with their soil bit, and we drilled into the soil. We're supposed to have 3 feet of soil, and I don't. I only had about 2.5, and there's some places on my farm that have a lot less than that too. We made 3 runs, 320 feet long. The stuff that came, the houser came in June. It was wet, we had a lot of rain. That manure kept mushrooming out and kept getting wider. I spent about 60 hours on the skid steer, pushing the piles up to get things to fit. And the manure that came from Pinnacle was wet. The compost, it should be 55–60% moisture. This stuff came in at 80. So then I added some bedding in. 11 slinger loads I was able to find some straw that had gone bad that was stored outside, and some old corn stalks that really helped that to heat. We were running about 120, 140. Bob actually came every week and took temperatures of those piles. And where he was composting over at Larson Acres with drier manure, he got to 140, 160. But if you get into that 130 and up, you're going to kill all the weed seeds in that. If you do this, don't make your runs longer than 300 feet, because as you go along, you're going to make them longer, and that's far enough to run with the skid steer on both ends. And also run your piles up and down the hill so that when you get a bunch of rain, the rain can run off. Because if you run them across the hill, you're making dams, and then you're going to make it wetter. Leave about 20–25 feet between the runs, and we didn't have any odor problems. There's some neighbors by Hauser, and nobody said anything that it smelled. The 72 loads at my farm is approximately the same amount of manure that my neighbor, his 66 cow dairy, now his young stock, would produce for a year. So there's a lot of manure. This is the compost analysis, which is formatted a little different than the manure test, so I'll just jump to the next one. So when it got done composting, we had, there it is, we had 10 nitrogen and 1.6 phos and 3.4 potash. I took the fertilizer prices today and did the price per pound. This is what a ton is worth as fertilizer. So I put approximately 5 ton, a little bit more than 5 ton on my farm because I had a little more product, and a little bit less at my sister's because I had a little. The hardest thing with this was trying to figure out, after we composted it, how much we actually had to figure out rate, because I wanted to cover the whole farm. So I had to do some measuring and some calculating, and we got pretty close. We were probably about 4 or 5 acres short at my sister's, maybe 4 acres short at my place. It really helped that Mike had a scale system on the spreader. So this is what we actually put on. When I started this, I was hoping to supply the P&K needs for the crop, and that's not enough. But we did get quite a bit of N, and all that N should be available. As you can see here, this is what it ended up being as fertilizer, and this is what it would cost. And then I took the spreading charges out for if I was spreading fertilizer or gypsum, which would be, I used $12 an acre for the spread gypsum and $6 for spreading fertilizer. So it cost me about $3.60 a ton more to make compost than fertilizer. So you either have to be closer to the source, So if you haul that compost like 4 or 5 miles, then you can have it equal the amount for fertilizer. Or preferably, I'd say if you could compost within a half a mile or so of your farm and then haul it as far as you want. Because with a 50% reduction in volume, you're going to save those hauling costs quite a bit. You'd lower those hauling costs in half. So this is, you can see when that first turn went through how full the turner was, and this is the last turn, how much that compost has come down. And actually I spread that gypsum alongside those runs, and Jeremy called me up and he goes, "What are those white lines over at your farm over there?" So I just took the slinger and put the gypsum in alongside, and that's what it looked like when we went to load it out. Mike came with the loader, and he's got a big spreader. That's a 24-ton Myers spreader. We were spreading 60 feet wide with a twin vertical spreader with a shield over it, and he had a scale on there. So we were able to calibrate it pretty quickly. But if I go back one, that's a 320 horse tractor, and it's not big enough for the spreader. We start yanking that 24-ton up and down the hill, so you had to be kind of smart with how you handle that, because and the compost is a lot heavier than straight manure because it's condensed down. So anybody got questions about how this went?
How did you manage your moisture? You said it came to you too wet to start with.
Yeah.
Well, what if we would have had a lot of rain? Would that
I'd have had a big mess. I'd had a big mess.
And did you do anything to catch if there was any rain runoff?
We didn't have much runoff. It did absorb it, but I had to bring that dry bedding into that product at Hauser Lane to dry it out. It wasn't heating like it should. Because if it's too wet, it packs down too much and it won't let the air in. The biology's got to have air to breathe. So that's really why you turn it. Bob would watch the temperatures, and when the temperature would start backing off, then he would come and turn. So, and if you had your own turner too, those guys had to come from Larson Acres down to my place, so I had some road time involved with that too. So, any more questions?
The compost from Pinnacle had the sand separate out first, didn't it?
Yeah, yep. When we went through I did the tour, that's a job I wouldn't want. They got a big sand run there. There's a guy running a loader all day long. A big trough with manure that's about waist deep, and that's what he does. He drives around in manure all day, loading out sand. I don't want that job. Any more questions, guys? Matt?
What about second year credit?
This should all be available because it's been digested, basically. Yep. And we shouldn't have any nitrogen tie up with it, and putting that 5 ton down, that shouldn't cause any issues for planting into it. That stuff is basically going to be like soil. So I don't foresee any issues of no tilling in for that. Mike?
So any thought on, you got the value per ton, what about the organic?
Right, there's some more extra, there's some organic matter there that's not valued, and there's some traces and calcium and also some extra things in the manure too, so, yep.
So what was your biggest learning from doing this, and did you do it again?
The question, yeah, well, I kind of went over what we learned, that we want to make sure those runs go up and down the hill. Will I do it again? I don't know if I am or not. I'm going to watch and see how the crop responds this year. And if the biology really helps the crop, I don't know if I have to do it every year, but I might do it every 3rd year or 4th year and see how that goes. So,
Did you look at the biology that was in there? Did you do like one of those tests that we have, that little test kit, to see what
No, I didn't do any biological tests. I still got some left, Jerry, that my wife threw in
You
a
do have
pot.
some left?
Yeah, she made a pot for Christmas, and I got about 5 gallons of it in a pot.
So it'd be interesting to test the biology in that. We were just playing with that biometer last week. You know, that the group has. This group has a biometer to be able to test the bacteria to fungal ratio and stuff like that to kind of then see how many colony forming units are in like a sample or a pound of it, so then you'd be able to know like how many bugs or microbes you were actually spreading out there too.
Yeah,
So if we have some of that, it'd be interesting to test that.
we know they're there, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
I did have to go in with a deep rip and rip up that acre where the piles were. That ground got packed down with 65 semi-loads running across it, and it had nothing on it through the summer. It baked and turned into a brick. So actually, I ran the deep rip through 4 times, because the first time it would only go in about 4 inches. So, plus I had the nose of the tractor standing up pretty tall too for a time or two. Any more questions, guys? Oh, way in the back, Dennis.
Well, if you would have had the ability to get manure, the wet manure, when you wanted it to spread, would you think the fertility would have been about the same to spread all that just as wet manure
Oh, so
versus composting?
right, that's what I was talking about with Mike. He's been spreading the separated solids. He just goes gets them and they throw them on a pile and spread them. And he's had big issues with that, tying up nitrogen and making a mat across the soil so it won't dry out. So there's a lot of benefits to this. I got a dairy up by Belleville that's got 600 cows with no manure storage. So they bought a compost turner and they're starting to get it down pat so that it works. So if you got farms that you want to put manure on and they're far away, this lets you condense that manure down so that you can save a whole bunch on hauling costs, because it's not cheap to haul things, no matter what you're hauling.
What was the moisture when you spread the compost?
Can you back that up?
Sorry, no, that's okay.
I think it was right at 60. Memory serves me. Keep going. Compost analysis right there. Moisture 64%. So. Okay. Any more? All right. Thanks, guys.
All right, thanks, Jake. Next we have Dan Truttmann to talk about his land management ethic, why he farms like he does.
Thanks, Tanya. When Jake first asked me to talk about that, I couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic, like, hey, why do you farm the way you do? But I think it's legit, so I'll do my best. So, just run through a few pictures and tell the story as we go here. So we've been, we're one of the charter members of Farmers of the Sugar River, so it's been a pleasure to be part of this group and to learn from each other and pass information back and forth. And, it's quite the learning process. There's far more that we don't know than what we do know, but we've learned a lot and are happy to share what we know. This is part of my team. From left to right, my brother Doug, nephew Colin, my dad, myself, our former vet, may rest in peace, Tim Bruns, our breeder and seed salesman. We put up a picture of our milkers, but that might make us subject to an immigration raid, so I'll just say that we have 6 very dedicated, hardworking milkers and herdsmen that our operation wouldn't run without, so I'm hoping we don't have to experience what to do if we don't have them. Leave it at that. And then this helper too. hard to farm without her around, and the feeling is mutual between us. So back in the 90s, we were doing rotational grazing on the farm, and through a variety of reasons over the years, we were doing kind of a hybrid system with a freestall barn and grazing. And essentially, we didn't have enough of the land base to grow the herd anymore with the grazing acres that we had. So we're all confinement now, milking about 500 jerseys 3 times a day in freestall barn, and using composted manure solids for bedding, and raising our own young stock with auto feeders for the calves. And then we're still grazing our red heifers, rotational grazing, on about 100 acres on land that we own and some pastures that we rent too. So that's worked very well for us over the years. Really good feed. The heifers do very well on it, and we put them on the land that isn't great for growing crops anyway, so it's good for the soil, good for the heifers. And then we sell our milk to a lactalis plant in Belmont, and they pay a protein premium. So with our Jersey milk, we typically get about a $10 basis over the class 3 price. So it's a good market for our milk. And then anytime the milk is touched by a rainbow, we get an extra premium over it. So there's gold in that tank that day. It's an interesting perspective of the farm here, where it kind of looks like it's flattened out because of the angle of the aircraft. And then when I look at that too, I think, wow, that's kind of a low percentage of arable ground in my neighborhood. But we do the best we can with what we're given. And so this is a good chunk of what we farm. And it looks like it was drawn by a 4th grader with a box of crayons. But it does kind of illustrate that we operate in a different environment than the lucky guys down here in the Judah, Albany area. But we have combined a fair number of the contour strips that actually were put in by my grandfather back in the 50s. And he was one of a group of Greene County dairymen that started conservation practices that a lot of people still use to this day. But thanks to the use of no-till and cover crops and things like that, we're able to combine some of those fields into bigger strips or bigger fields that we're able to manage a little bit better with larger equipment. So where we can, where the slopes allow and where the management allows and the nutrient management plan allows for it, we'll combine those somewhat. And then our crop rotation, well, the crops we grow consist of corn for silage, corn for grain, soybeans, wheat, and alfalfa, and the light green areas are pasture for the heifers. The rotation itself varies depending on the type of ground that we're on. Some fields are more suited to the corn bean rotation if we need to do that, to just stay with that if the fields are flat enough. And then some fields are far enough away that we prefer not to grow silage on them and not to have to haul liquid manure to them, so then they just stay in like a wheat, bean, or corn grain rotation, so we can minimize trucking. Another perspective, it's surprisingly almost the exact same area. And let's see, looking across here, that's the county line, Dane Greene County line, which cuts right through the old dairy barn where Dad and Grandpa and I used to milk. And then just north of the house by a stone's throw. So we are Greene County residents, for better or worse, I guess it depends on your perspective. And then right down almost the center here is County J, which separates us into 2 different watersheds, which essentially J is the dividing line most of the way through a lot of the county. So we've got the Sugar River watershed on this side and Pectonica watershed on the other side. So we do our part to try to contribute clean water to both and encourage our neighbors to do the same. A couple of other takeaways when I was looking at this picture. You can almost, some of these uncropped areas, you can almost see right through the soil, if there is any, right down to the rocks. They're so shallow and thin. And those are the areas we don't farm, but we do farm right up to them. And so clearly we're dealing with thinner soils and a lot of rocks. And a lot of the reason that we started farming the way we do now, with no-till especially, is because of rocks. As a teenager, or as teenagers, my brother and I, our least favorite job, everybody's least favorite job, right, is picking rocks. But every spring we had to do it, load after load after load. And then the next year, for some reason, do it all again. It's like somebody put them back, or, my dad always said, well, be sure to leave a few there for seed so that we'd have something to do the next year. And it's a miserable job. It's good exercise, though, but miserable job. All right, yeah. So, but I just started thinking, because I had a lot of time to think when I was out there. Why do we have to do this over and over? Why don't we ever get ahead of this? And clearly it's because of our tillage practices. We would erode off enough soil every year that we'd expose another crop of rocks to pick the following year. And so around that time, this was, it was mid-'80s, so it was like 20 years ago. I was telling Tanya, I'm having a little trouble with time perspective here. And I was thinking, well, it can't be 40 years. There's no way I've aged that much. But yeah, it was a while ago. But a neighbor had recently, or at that time, had bought a no-till planter. And my brother and I badgered our dad endlessly. And we just rent that, stop doing all this tillage, and try no-tilling. And eventually we wore him down. I would say we won him over, but we wore him down. And we started doing that. And I don't know how successful it was compared to what we were doing, but we figured it out and we made it work. And so we continued to do that for quite a few years. And then we hired somebody to plant for us for a while. And then eventually bought our own planter and have just continued to stick with it, work with it, and improve our practices. Because I knew, even as a kid, that I wanted to farm, I wanted my kids to farm, or somebody, nephew now, to farm. We needed to do a better job if there was going to be anything left to farm. And to continue the legacy of what our ancestors had started with the contour strips and things like that. We have we have actually good soil, high organic matter, 4 to 6%, because we're on the northern edge here of what was a 6,000 acre prairie, Greens Prairie area that goes down into town of York. So organic matter is good. It's just that we're limited on the volume of soil there. It's just shallow. We can grow good crops if we get water, but we need regular rains. I hear people on the radio talking now about drought in the spring. Oh, we don't have enough soil moisture and blah blah blah. The only rain that matters to us is in season. Did it rain this week or didn't it? We just need regular, consistent rain, and we can do really well. And so our no-till definitely contributes to being able to hold and build the soil. And then we've incorporated cover crops to go along with our corn silage production that we're doing, because we need to keep those fields covered and retain nutrients too. So so that was really the start of of why we farm the way we do now. Was what Grandpa started, and then no-till planting and cover crops. So it's very important to us to continue to focus on how can we do better for our own benefit, definitely. But then, as climate's changing, we need to think about worst-case scenarios, like this sort of thing that happens more and more regularly. That's Blanchardville in there, and I'm not even sure what year it is. I think it's probably 2016, somewhere around there, give or take. And so some people have the attitude, well, these things, there's nothing you can do about it. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to deal with if you get a 5-inch, 6-inch, 7-inch rain, something like that. It is hard to deal with. but I wouldn't say it's not preventable. I would guess this was based on the height of the corn, which you can see up here and there. This is probably in July sometime. So if we'd have heavy rains, like we had one year in February when Jamie Patton came, on frozen ground, okay, there isn't anything anybody can do about that. Although she did see, actually, that the fields that had cover crops on it had less runoff, or at least less soil loss. Probably lost the same amount of water off of those fields, but the soil stayed there. And I know too, if you get enough rain, you're going to get runoff out of the woodlands, which, they're all around. But I do think too, events like that happen largely because of tillage, loss of soil structure, lack of water infiltration. So I think to a certain extent, those sorts of things are somewhat preventable, or at least we should do everything that we can to make sure we're not contributing to it. And that's how we farm all the time. Blanchardville had a nice swimming pool right in there. And that would happen to it about every 4 years. So we're working on putting in a new one this year, hopefully, that's going to be just high enough so that doesn't happen again. So farming practices, so good you can almost smell it just by looking at the picture. We're still surface applying liquid manure. With the 500 cows we have, we produce about 4 million gallons a year, so it's a fair bit to handle. We have tried dragline applications and knifing. It hasn't worked well for us yet. Maybe we'll consider it again in the future. So for now, we're still surface applying. But it really helps to be applying on top of cover crops because with the soil structure we have from no-till and cover crops, we get really good infiltration. You'll see in the next slide we have a manure solid separator that we use for our bedding. The manure runs about 95% moisture, which is similar to a lot of liquid manures, but because we run our solid separator and the particles get broken down a lot, it actually acts a lot more watery than other liquid manures might. So if we're applying that onto a well-packed, like say a field we've just taken corn silage off of, you can tend to get a lot of runoff. Well, we learned that early on. We thought, oh, this thin manure, that will soak in really well. Well, it does in certain situations, and if it doesn't, it runs really fast. So what we typically do after corn silage is get the rye planted right away. And then we like to wait until the soil temp drops below 50 to put the manure on so that the nitrogen is more stable. Sometimes that makes us nervous though, because this last fall it was really nice all through October. And we're kind of twiddling our thumbs waiting for the temps to drop. And then the weather changed real fast and we had a lot of manure to move in a short time. So it happens, but we got it done. Another benefit that's been mentioned today, I think, is that the ground with a good mat of rye on it really carries the loads. I think Mike said that. Carries the traffic really well. So we don't get much compaction. Our soil doesn't compact very well anyway, but we really don't make tracks on it with silage trucks or tankers. In 2016, we put in this manure solid separator to make bedding for the cows. And so it's a screw press. And now what we're doing is taking that to a hoop barn, and we're doing some composting with it to try to maintain that 130 plus degree temp to kill off a lot of bad bacteria before it goes into the stalls. And it's working well most of the time, but it's a biological system that has its challenges too. And this sort of thing, manure systems, sand separators, solid separators, all of that, it's a little bit like owning a boat. The best 2 days are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. Everything in between can be kind of high maintenance. Over the years, we've done a fair bit of composting too, but it's always been with either a custom operator coming in or us using his machine to do it, which is not coming around anymore. So we're a little bit in the lurch on that, and we haven't had the spare change lying around to buy our own machine yet, but it's in the plan. I don't know. It's on our wish list. But it has worked well for our bedding pack, coming out of calf pens, calving pens, things like that. Especially any place where we're using a lot of straw because of the really high carbon content in it. We've definitely found when we put that on corn ground, it ties up a lot of nitrogen. So then we've switched to putting it on bean ground, but then we realized too that beans need a lot of nitrogen and it can have a negative impact there too. So we're trying other methods now to get it broke down more, or at least spread it as thin as we can on bean ground. So we drill a lot of cover crops in, 100 acres of wheat, which is a good part of our rotation. Provides a lot of bedding for the animals and feed too. Rye and triticale for silage, do about 100 acres of that to feed heifers and dry cows, and hundreds of acres of cover crops, rye or bin run wheat, typically. But we're also kicking around other ideas for what to do before corn. And no, these two pictures don't actually go together. But the one on the right is the monitor for our corn planter, showing a lot of good information. So, corn planter was a 12-row 30-inch planter that we bought in, oh geez, I'm bad with years. Why do I even start with that? Maybe 6-7 years ago, something like that. And then we converted it to a 16-row 20-inch planter because mostly we're planting either silage corn or beans with it. And then our custom harvester bought a 20-inch row head for the grain, for the corn that we want to harvest for grain. So that's worked well to allow one planter to do everything. And then right away we put hydraulic down pressure on because we knew there's a fair bit of variability in soils throughout the farm. Variability, well, like here. Some areas have cover crops, some don't. Sometimes you'll hit a compacted track from silage trucks or manure tankers, things like that. So we thought it would be important to have that. And we were just going to stop at the hydraulic down pressure, and as we got things all tore apart and we're looking at chains and all of that, decided that now that would be the time to put electric drives on too for the seeding. And that's all worked well 99% of the time. We've been really happy with it. Cover crops, or at least the planting green part, we definitely plant all our beans green, and then spray those off typically 7 to 14 days after, usually targeting a week to 10 days. And if the crop is a little bit light, the nice thing about that is we can just let it grow for 10 days, because that's not a lot of biomass there. It's okay, but it's a little bit light. And that field's uneven, I think, because of some traffic on it. But kind of our max of what we want to go into for and achieve for biomass on a bean crop would be somewhere in that 12-inch range. We don't want it to get too tall or too stemmy, because then we start to get a lot of lignin and a lot of fiber there. It's great for keeping the weeds down, but it can have some other negative impacts. And then for planting corn, we have planted green, but we're not currently doing that. We typically will spray it off about a week before planting, just because we're chicken. Probably. We're a little more conservative. We've seen some nitrogen tie up. We're still willing to learn and try some different things, but we can't afford a lot of train wrecks. So we just play it a little bit safe that way. And then we do have our own sprayer now. We've had a pull type for a long time, and then self-propelled now, which we find to be very useful to get the timing right. Whatever time we say is the right time to do it is when we want to go. When we were hiring it done, calling the co-op, and when we thought we wanted it done, and if they didn't get there because we were 12th on the list or it rained for a week, and then maybe we're a week late getting it done, then a really good plan can go to heck in a hurry. So it's been really nice to be able to be very timely with the termination, and also controlling our chemical cost was a really big deal over the last few years when we've had some big ups and downs of chemical prices. To be able to have that bought and on the farm to avoid those swings has been really helpful. This is from a field day that we had sometime. I don't know, what year was it, Ty?
I don't remember.
A few years ago. We've been really pleased with weed control when we're utilizing the cover crops. But this crop looks like it did get pretty stemmy for corn. I'm sure there was a nitrogen tie up there. And even this one for beans, we were late getting in it to terminate. And I think we probably didn't use enough chemical because it looks like some of the rye there is still kind of green. And so weed control was really good, but it was shady enough that it did hold the beans back a little bit and cost us some yield. So we've tried to be a lot more timely than that going into it. But that's how it was looking later on then, maybe a month later. It looked great all season, but it didn't feel quite like it could have because of some timing issues. And then that's just eye candy. And before long, we'll be pushing up sunflowers, but hopefully not pushing up daisies. So I think that's the last one. If you have any questions, Mike.
Explain your bedding pack composting.
Explain my compost bedding for the freestalls?
No, the bedding pack.
Bedding pack
How are
compost.
you doing that?
Okay. It's a poor man's system right now. So my dad and nephew are heading that up. So my dad sits in the tractor with the box spreader running, and my nephew's going down through the compost row and loading it in the spreader and spitting it back out into another row. And in a couple hours they can get through a row and get it turned again. And that's what we're doing for now until yes, okay, so Jake asked, did we try a snowblower? Yeah, Colin actually thought maybe he could do it with that, and no, you cannot, it's too stringy. But with our fibers that we're producing for the bedding for the freestalls, we are actually using a big snowblower for that to turn our rows.
So how long do you compost the bedding pack?
How long do we compost the bedding pack? Until we feel like it's broken down enough that we're not seeing a lot of the straw fibers there anymore, that the color's changing, that it's really becoming a different product. So we want a darker, finer product. We kind of are getting a feeling, and if you turn it and it doesn't heat up much anymore, it's consumed most of its energy. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's ideal compost. It might just mean that your carbon to nitrogen ratios aren't right, and it just ran out of gas anyway. But when it starts to lose any manure smell and start to smell more like earth, and it's a darker, finer product, then it's getting pretty close to finished then. We're not experts on that yet, but it's also not super complicated. Having your own turner, though, like Jake was talking about, if it's too wet, if you had your own turner and you could get the timing right on things and get your moisture down to where it needs to be, guys that have their own turners too, if you get rain on it, you get a lot of rain on it, and you kind of get cooled down, and you get out there and get them turned, you can drive a lot of that moisture off and get your temps back up and kick it back into gear again. It is helpful to at least have quick access to a machine somewhere nearby. I haven't talked to Goebbels yet about whether we could rent that occasionally.
Tractor to run it.
Yeah, part of our hang up before was that we didn't have a tractor with a CVT, so we didn't buy one because we didn't have one to run it, but now we've got a couple that could do it, so unless you want to be on the clutch all the time, ruining your clutch, you probably want a CVT.
when we turned our piles, the tractor was running at a quarter of a mile an hour, maybe
Yeah.
3/10 of a mile an hour. And Larson's have big turner, that's a 160 horse and that they rated at, and that tractor was 240, and I heard it grunt a time or two when we first turned it. They were picking up a lot of stuff. That was a 220 horse.
Yeah, it takes a bit of power. No doubt.
All right, let's give Dan a round of applause. Take 10 minutes for a cookie break, and then we'll end our session with our nitrogen plots that Jordan and I put together.